So a few months ago, I put out a video where I tried to fix 7 broken motherboards, and you guys seem to really enjoy that content, but we were unsuccessful at fixing 4 of those 7 boards, and the top comment in that video was that we needed to replace the CPU socket on at least 3 of these boards, and that's exactly what we're gonna do today, and spoiler alert, I have no experience doing that. Now, I'm pretty sure it was the 3 gigabyte boards here that needed CPU socket replacements. At least that's what we all think that these need in order to be a functional motherboard. And we do have this tough gaming board right here, but unfortunately, this is the one that had like some residual flux left on it. And there isn't a lot of damage to these pins. And when I tried to get it to work, it would not, no matter what I did. So I'm pretty sure this is a dead board. So we're gonna use this as like our dummy board before I go ahead and try and fix these boards. Now, I do need to say before we get into anything, this is not a how-to guide. I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing other than the fact that I watched a few YouTube videos, so there is a strong possibility that I completely destroy all of these boards right here rather than fix them. But regardless, we're gonna give it a shot and we're gonna do this together. Now, I did see a couple YouTube videos where people were like coming up with their like homemade like workstations where you can try and heat the board up and then desolder the socket from the motherboard, but that is not what we're gonna be doing here today. You're gonna need to come with me into my really messy garage so that I can show you what I bought for all this stuff. I bought an IR650 BGA rework station and a soldering iron and hot air gun. Let this be a lesson. If you have a hobby that you wanna get into, spend the $300 it takes. I promise that $500 that you're about to spend is the best $1,000 investment that there will ever be. And obviously don't judge the garage. I actually live here. Oh, I can make it better. Hold on one second. There you go. A little mood lighting. So from what I understand about how to do this, what we need to do is we need to use the bottom heater to heat the bottom of the board to around 100 degrees Celsius, and then we need to slowly increase that to around 150 degrees Celsius for the bottom temperature, and then we can run the program that will control the top heater here that should release the CPU socket. Apparently what you wanna do is you wanna make sure the board is nice and hot so that way when you run this, it doesn't warp the board in any way. That's why the bottom heater is so important. Now we're gonna do our very best to successfully replace the CPU socket on this board, even though I don't believe that doing that is going to make this board work at all, but we're gonna try our very best because obviously this is the practice, and then we jump immediately into the boards that we probably can fix if we can do this correctly. All right, so for the first board, I took off all the heat sinks. So I put some foil here to protect, our VRMs and everything. We wanna make sure that these don't get too hot. I mean, they're obviously going to get hot. I took the cover off around here. I've got a thermometer here so I can kind of read the temperature of what the board is, and then I have another one here in the back. Now we're gonna set this right here. We're gonna kind of line it up and we're gonna bring that top heater down. I'm gonna show you what it'll look like in the end here. So the top heater here, we kind of wanna align this. You move the entire like workbench here, and then we can lower our top heater down to kind of get the right distance. You don't wanna be too close because it will completely destroy the board. So we wanna make sure that this might be the right distance. You just kind of line things up. And then obviously, this rework station might work a little different than others. So we're gonna have to use this as a test, destroy this board, take notes, and then hopefully we don't make the same mistakes twice. Being completely honest, I'm not exactly sure what I expected from flux, but it being sticky was definitely not on my bingo card. Getting any of this on you is nasty. So once I fired this thing up and the board started to get hot, I was not at all ready for just how much smoke this thing would emit. So I tried to refrain from talking during this part, but I did feel like a new parent, constantly checking to see if the CPU socket was loose. The whole process of this starts moving really fast though. The software that I was running jumps the temp from 160 degrees Celsius to 225 degrees Celsius really fast. So this being my first time, it was kind of understandable that I was a bit on edge, but we were successful in removing our very first CPU socket. It's not until the next part that things went downhill fast. So some major mistakes were made. I definitely destroyed this board. It's completely toast and there's no reviving this thing. But this will make a good like goof around board for me to like practice soldering, because the soldering aspect is where I completely ruined it, because we were successful in getting the CPU socket off, which is amazing. I'm really excited that we were able to do that, but unfortunately I pulled it too soon. We hadn't melted all of the solder joints yet, and I pulled too soon. And that's where the problems began, because that left a whole bunch of solder on the board, and I definitely didn't watch enough videos on how to remove the extra solder, and that's where everything just went to shit. Now, in between this board and our next one, I am going to watch a couple of videos and kind of familiarize myself a little bit more with removing excess solder from a motherboard, so maybe we'll be more successful in the second one. So right after I finished destroying this board completely, I made the conscious decision to kind of switch the way that I'm gonna structure the rest of this video, only because I was completely unaware of just how much smoke this was going to produce, and it would fill up my garage, and it can't be healthy to be breathing that in. So I decided that from now on, I'm gonna wear a respirator in the rest of the video, and I'm just gonna show you footage of the board, and I'm gonna tell you what I learned along the way. But I will make a promise to you, if you guys like this type of content, I will build like a dedicated soldering workbench in my garage with all the proper pieces of equipment that you would need to make sure that you can stay as safe as possible, because I would love to continue to do this type of content. I just want to know if you guys like it. So if you could like, comment, and subscribe, that would let me know that you guys are enjoying yourselves. Now, this board actually ended up being a pretty terrible test subject, because it gave me the wrong impression of what kind of temperature was needed in order to pull this CPU socket off. Now, this board actually at around 220 degrees Celsius, the CPU socket came off. Now, this was the board that had the flux left over on it the first time we looked at it in the last video. And what I'm thinking is that that flux that was left over was from them replacing the CPU socket, because moving forward, this CPU socket was the only one that was able to be pulled off at such a low temperature. So I'm pretty sure that it had already been changed out once before. But the next board on the chopping block was the B650 Eagle board. Now, like I just said, I had a very unrealistic expectation of what temperature the CPU socket needed to be in order for it to be released from the board. And unfortunately, once we hit around 235 degrees Celsius, I started to kind of panic, like maybe it was stuck on there. So I pulled maybe a little too hard, pulling off one of the corners, as you can see in the video, and that really sucked. But we were eventually able to get the entire CPU socket off once it hit 265 degrees Celsius, which is way hotter than the previous motherboard. But after we got the CPU off, this is the first time I decided to try and remove the solder with the board still on the bench and the top infrared heater still over the CPU socket. Now, I did make the decision to do this on the fly, so it was very sloppy. I was not really set up to make sure that I could do it well, and that caused me to even drop like a huge glob of solder onto the motherboard, which I was able to get up, but it was very sloppy and it felt very rushed. Now, because it was a rush operation and I was not really set up to get this done, I was just kind of like a spur of the moment on the fly idea. It worked out well if I would have executed it a little bit better, because we still have a little bit of solder left up here at the top, and we got kind of a little bit of bridging down here, but it's definitely leagues better than the first attempt that we did with the Asus board. But either way, now I have two dummy boards to practice on. The next board on our list was my B650 Gaming X board. Now, this is actually the first board that I decided to put tinfoil not only over the VRMs, but also the RAM slots here. I did notice that the RAM slots on the first two boards were getting extremely hot, because the temperatures are just extreme when you're working with this thing. So I decided that I was just gonna try and protect the RAM slots as well. I'm gonna do that moving forward, just to kind of try and add a little extra layer of protection to the motherboard. I also may have gone just a little bit too heavy with the flux on this CPU. I was trying to make sure that it was fully coated, but in that process, I added so much that it kind of dripped through the bottom and onto the bottom ceramic plate, which created even more smoke in my garage, which was really fun to work through. Now, in the minimal research that I did in order to get prepared for this video, I noticed that some people, when it came to these CPU socket removals, would put flux around the edges, like all the way around it, but wouldn't put it in in the center, but the one person that I saw doing it the most, he made a whole bunch of shorts, he would put so much in the center, and he has like so many videos of him replacing CPU sockets. So that's why I used so much flux. Now, if you guys, any one of you watching, have a better idea, I am all ears. I'm just trying to get better at this, and any help that you guys can give me would be greatly appreciated. Now, when it comes to removing the socket on this particular motherboard, it only took us getting up to 250 degrees Celsius in order for the CPU to become loose enough to remove from this board. Now, when it comes to the desoldering of the CPU socket and trying to get all that solder off, we actually did an extremely good job. I was really happy, but when I took it off of the rework station and I looked at it under a microscope, I could see that there were some issues with the pads here. We had some bridging going on, and I've chalked that up to my soldering iron being too hot. I run it at 700 degrees Fahrenheit, which they said that maybe I should drop that down. So I dropped it down to 600 degrees Fahrenheit for the next board, and that's where that's the sweet spot right there. What I think is the combination of the board already being 250 degrees Celsius and me adding a 700 degree Fahrenheit soldering iron to it, it's too much heat, and that's what caused our bridging here, which really sucks because we were so close to this being perfect. But now I have 3 practice boards that I can work on. But now for our last board, the X670 Aorus Elite. Out of all 4 boards, this one right here is the Mac Daddy, so I made sure to pay extra attention to what I was doing. Now, this board's CPU was also kind of a pain to get off. We did have to get up to 260 degrees Celsius in order for us to be able to remove this CPU. And once we had that socket removed and we had our soldering iron down to 600 degrees Fahrenheit, we were able to successfully remove all of the old solder without damaging any of the pads. It wasn't the cleanest job. It was definitely far from perfect, but it looked absolutely fantastic, and I definitely celebrated that. But now it was time to go ahead and put on our brand new socket. And I made a mistake. This motherboard is the kind that doesn't have an outline of the CPU socket. Some of them have little outlines to make sure that if you were to put a new one on, you could line it up perfectly, but some of them do not. And this is one of those motherboards that does not have the CPU socket lines. So I had to do my very best to eyeball it, because if I was going to do any markings, I should have done that beforehand. And that's on me. That's rookie mistakes. I completely forgot about that entire step, went ahead, removed the socket, and now I'm just guessing. But we were able to get a new socket put onto this board, and honestly, it seems like it's probably in the right place. So we successfully removed the old socket, we successfully cleaned the old socket's residue, and we successfully attached a brand new socket seemingly in the right place. There's only one more problem, and that problem is I probably should have rewatched the first video that I did with all of these motherboards, because if I did rewatch my old video that I made 2 months ago, I would know that this was the board that wouldn't give any power to anything. I couldn't even test this board because with it all plugged up to a power supply, nothing happens. This board was fried and dead before we even replaced the socket. I felt unimaginably silly and honestly a little let down because I really wanted to see this thing work. But what we gotta understand is that not every video is full of wins. Sometimes you gotta fail, and that's just part of life. And today we failed 4 times. Now I have 4 boards that I can goof around on and practice soldering with. So there's always a silver lining. Plus we learned a ton. This was actually pretty successful. And if this was a motherboard that, functioned at least a little bit beforehand and it just needed a new CPU socket, I think that we would have had a successful board here. Unfortunately, this was just a board that is dead for a different reason other than the CPU socket, and we just replaced it with a shiny brand new socket. Now, as I said earlier, if you guys enjoy this type of content, I have absolutely no problem spending a little bit of money and going ahead and setting up a more permanent area in my garage, with an air cleaner so I'm not sucking in fumes all day, so that we can do this type of content more often. I had an absolute blast goofing with this stuff, and I'm a huge fan of learning something new, and it's even more fun to do it on camera because that way you guys who have more experience than I do in this specific area can help me out, and I really appreciate that. So if you don't mind me, I'm gonna go continue to practice my soldering so the next time we do this, I'm maybe a little bit better than I am now. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video.